Welcome to Master Your Life Podcast. I am Sunny Bajwa. Today we have a special guest who helps entrepreneurs, business owners, and anybody for that matter. Our guest today is an occupational therapist, AMAN RANGI. Thanks for coming today, AMAN.
Thanks for having me, Sunny.
Appreciate that. So, AMAN, I wanted to know a little bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about what you do and how you help people.
Sure. So clinically, Sunny, my background is as an occupational therapist. So I can tell you a little bit more about what that is. But essentially, it's a healthcare profession that's focused on helping people maximize function. So we work in a variety of different areas, with ranging from physical injuries, cognitive, so things like brain injuries, and everything in between, and especially mental health.
Yep.
In terms of so that's my clinical background. In terms of my day-to-day practice, I have my own company called Infinite Life Potential. I do basically contracting for a variety of different organizations, ranging from insurance corporations, a lot of law firms, as well as working directly with people in a one-on-one capacity.
Absolutely. I mean, a little bit about, I'll share with you guys a little bit about Aman and I. We've known each other for over a decade now, and our fathers used to be really good friends as well. And, there's people in your life that, we all have friends and family, but there's people that fill your cup up, and sometimes some people that might take a little bit of, might drain your cup or your energy. I can say I'm so blessed to have this guy in my life. He definitely fills my cup up. Some of our conversations that we have will just go on for an hour, and we're talking about life, the meaning, and this and that, beautiful conversations. And I wanted to have Aman on today so he can pass on some of that wisdom as well. So, Aman, what made you pursue a career in as an OT?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny you mentioned our conversations, because we've joked in the past about how our regular conversations could be a podcast.
100%, man.
And now here we are.
Yeah.
As far as career in OT, so it's always easier to connect the dots when you're looking backwards and thinking about all the things that maybe led you down the path that you did. In my case, I have my undergraduate bachelor's degree is in kinesiology. So basically working with people physically to help them rehab after injuries.
Right.
Most people were either hurt at work or car accidents. Before that, I was a personal trainer. And so I was really always working with people, mainly in a very physical capacity.
Yeah.
What happened, though, was most kinesiologists, when we're looking at what's the next step for us, if we want to do further education, is usually physiotherapy.
Right.
So I was looking, and at UBC is where I did my education. So it was the next step where I was looking at that. A lot of my friends were applying and getting in. And then I was working as a kinesiologist, and I had an interesting file. It was an ICBC file. So somebody who was injured in a car accident, somebody who had a concussion and depression.
Right.
And so I took on that file and worked with an occupational therapist on that file. And the occupational therapist was helping them basically return back to life.
Wow.
Right. So they were helping them figure out how to do the basic things, as well as things like return to work, a lot of coaching. So I identified strongly with that kind of an approach, looked more into the profession, and realized this is something that I think I might fit my values and beliefs a little bit more in terms of having a little bit of more of a holistic approach. So I just looked further into it and realized that it was quite a diverse field. And, I applied, got in, and completed the training, and here I am. So what led me to it essentially was basically the desire to work with people using a more holistic approach.
Right.
Nowadays, a lot of healthcare professionals, even physiotherapists for that matter, have a holistic approach in their own way. Yep. It's just that I wanted to work at the time, I thought I really wanted to work in a pure mental health setting. So I thought I wanted to work in the hospital on a psychiatric unit or in the community. Yeah. We'll talk about kind of what led me to where I am now, because I did do that and decided it wasn't for me in that way. But that's essentially what led me to the profession as a whole. Okay. No, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. So,
Can you name a pivotal moment in your life that significantly changed the way how you operated your business? Was it a health crisis, a significant event, or something with a relationship, anything that impacted your trajectory completely?
Definitely. So, I think responding to adversity is a pretty universal concept, right? Yep. We can all talk about situations that we've had to maybe pivot, or things didn't go the way that we had thought they were going to go. Yep. For me, what the first time I experienced that, I think in a stronger in a more stronger context was my first year university. So my first year university, my dad passed away. And so that was my first time kind of coming to terms with a life-altering situation, right? So, I was going to school, focused on this end goal. And then at that time, a lot of those things, typically when we deal with an adverse situation like that, a lot of things start to lose meaning. So at that point, I was, rethinking a lot of things. But it also, like any adverse event, it also allows you an opportunity for growth.
Right.
And so that was an opportunity for me to realize, in my head, I connect the dots backwards and realize I basically had to grow up overnight.
Yeah.
Right. So it was one of those things where a lot had changed permanently.
How old were you at that time?
I was, it's going on 10 or 11 years now. So I was either 18 or 19 at the time. Yeah, 18 or 19.
Significantly, young age for that matter, and to have to, go through that life event, that's definitely, can change people's trajectory, especially at that age. I mean, sorry to cut you off. Sorry, continue.
Oh yeah, no, of course, you're 100% right. And I know we've talked about that ourselves, about having shared in that experience in similar ways.
Yeah.
But you're right. It basically knocks your life off balance.
Totally.
Right? So you when dealing with grief like that, you feel everything and nothing at the same time when you're trying to cope with those feelings. So I think that was the first, for me anyways, aside from, we all have things that happen, but at least if I think about like a very salient event, that would be the one where it definitely sticks out. It's one of those situations where exactly the day, exactly what you were doing at the time. I know in your case, we've shared about that as well. So that was probably the first kind of event like that. And it takes years. It took me years. I still continued with my schooling. Everything kind of got affected for a while, but eventually you emerge stronger and more resilient.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, kudos to you for, being able to identify that at a younger age. I mean, I've seen a lot of people, especially at that pivotal moment at 18, 19, where they can, say, I have all the reasons and excuses not to excel or to proceed on the right path. We've seen that time and time again. And the fact that you decided to still pursue that career and, turn that around, that almost, like we said, negative into a positive, and to, propel your career, that's a beautiful thing, right? Okay, let's ask a question about, let's move on to the mental health aspect. How would you say in today's day and age, you would see mental health being an impact? Is it a large impact in the world that you come across a lot of clients with mental health issues or mental illness? Do you see that very prominent now, opposed to, let's say, 2 years ago to now? It's a big shift.
Yes, I think there's been a big shift for many different reasons. So if we rewind for a second, in terms of so clinically, when I finished school, graduated, I started working on an inpatient psychiatric unit.
Yeah.
So really that's a typical unit on a hospital. In all the hospitals here, you tend to have them. So these are individuals that are in the most acute stage, so a crisis type of a stage, right? So they're in the hospital. A lot of them are not allowed to leave. It's a locked unit, and they're dealing with the worst form of mental illness at that stage. So I worked there for about a year and a half as an occupational therapist, and I also worked for a couple of years in a different role on a similar unit. So I had a lot of experience, at least with that side of the spectrum, in a clinical capacity. I eventually realized that, okay, I wanted to transition to a different area. I felt like I could do more for people who are a little bit more on the spectrum of their basic needs are being met, and they're managing in some way. Because what happens in the hospital, we have systems, not even in the hospital, but in the world, we have systems challenges and issues. Yeah. And essentially the hospital system is designed to basically discharge planning begins the day or the minute you arrive. Really? Right? So they're always trying to figure out, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, it is what it is, right? It's just the way it works. So then I started working in the community, working with people who are maybe at home or at work, but struggling and not maybe achieving their full potential. And so that was like my direct experience for the most part. Yeah. Now I can tell you that when it comes to mental illness, there's a lot of things that have changed in the world in the last couple of years. Right. So as far as my experience with it has been, there's we look to statistics to answer these questions, right? And as you know, numbers don't lie. They don't lie. They tell a lot of at least at like a face value what's happening. Yeah. So we know that at least in statistics can vary from different parts of the world. But in Canada, we know that statistically about 1 in 5, so about 20% of Canadians is going to experience a mental illness at some point in their life.
Let me just break that down a little bit. When they're saying 1 in 5 Canadians could experience a mental illness or a mental health event, what are we talking about here? Are we saying depression? What exactly would you say? That could it be a specific event or just a wide variety of events?
Yeah, so it can definitely vary. So when we're looking at when you look at the statistics, sometimes these are the best questions to ask. Is when you start unpacking, okay, what do these numbers mean?
Yes.
But globally, what we can see is that if the statistic is about 1 in 5 Canadians, right, so about 20% of the population, could be any one of those things.
Yeah.
It could be over their lifetime, or it could be in a year as well.
Okay.
Right. So if you think about, most of us can conceptualize a year, right? If we think about a year in our lives. So if you think about it annually, about 20% of Canadians at least are experiencing some form of mental illness.
Yep.
And then when you start unpacking those numbers a little bit more, because we've talked a little bit, mental health is a universally complex topic, but it also universally affects men and women, children, people of different ages.
Absolutely.
But obviously, a topic that's especially near and dear to my heart is men's mental health.
Yeah.
Just because being a man myself and having dealt with these challenges and having close friends, we've had our conversations as well. But having close friends within the industry, entrepreneurs, professionals, dealing with these challenges. When you look at men's mental health, and we even have Men's Mental Health Month, right, once a year. So when you look at those numbers, things get even more interesting, I would say, because if you think about it, so we talked about the 1 in 5 Canadians, but if you look at overall in about a year, so in terms of mental illness, arguably, unfortunately, the worst, most crisis type of situation would be we look at suicide rates, right? So it's a very heavy topic, but if we look at the statistics, there's about 4,000 individuals who commit suicide every year, Canadians.
Right.
And of those, 75% are men.
Wow. I mean, so that leads me to another point as well. Nowadays we see so many gurus online and saying, you know what, you can just go run 100 miles or go do this. Mental health is quote unquote, they will say it's BS, right? And I'm not in the camp of agreeing with that. I think this is there's definitely something going on with a lot of people, and it's been going on for a number of years. I think now we finally can clinically, explain that there's a condition. What is your thoughts on that? Nowadays we'll have anybody that just, can pick up the phone, turn the camera on, and have a voice, which to a certain degree is great. To a certain degree, it's influencing a lot of people. What's your thoughts on that when people will say, yeah, it's not true, you can do this, or, I've heard of this person. What are your thoughts on generally of people having that kind of insight?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think the $1 million word is clinically. So you mentioned clinically, right? So I think everyone's entitled to their opinion. Yeah. And the thing with the big, social media, for example, or access to information has never been as abundant as it is today, which is a blessing and a curse, because we've got this vast sea of information. But now the tricky thing is, as consumers, we have to be skeptical and careful with what we interpret, because you can take any topic. So we're talking about mental health, but even if you take any other topic, you can find what appears to be a reputable source with one opinion, and you can find another reputable source. Let's talk about fitness. You'll have the low carb people,
low carb and high carb,
and it's hard because you have people who have achieved results either way. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is, like you said, we have to look at, when forming opinions or gathering information from different sources, you have to evaluate the source.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to be skeptical. I think, I'm biased because I'm a clinician myself. I think as clinicians, we have we have some varying degrees of training, education, and expertise on the matter. So we can offer that perspective. Absolutely. Now, it doesn't mean that other people don't have value. It just means that you have to be careful in interpreting the source of the information. And the challenge is as a clinician, we're taught skills and how to apply them to different situations, being cognizant of the individuals and using a team approach to work with them.
Yep.
Versus, I think the challenge that you've identified is right now is challenging because there's a lot of this kind of like white knuckle, tough love kind of an approach.
Yep.
And, we've talked about how, I have a concept called, that I call mental health for entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Right. So I think about, there's, first of all, any person that's giving you information without asking you more questions or giving you kind of like a cookie cutter approach, is probably somebody to steer clear from.
Okay.
Right. So it's similar to like if if I approached you to ask for advice in the mortgage industry, as a professional, you'd ask me questions.
Absolutely.
You'd ask me questions about my situation, those questions, and then you can tailor a response that's going to apply best to me and my plan. So you have people, and don't get me wrong, there's some really great people out there, and that's their brand, right? That's their brand. That's who they are. And they're not bad. Like if you think about, somebody who comes to my head is David Goggins. We're both big fans, and I love him. Yeah, and he's out there, shirt off, running, and he's great. And I think you have to accept him for how he is, in what he's providing. But the problem is that you have to understand that, if you're somebody who's depressed, clinically, like legitimate depression, you're struggling, and you see some of these things, it might not apply to your situation, because often it can just make you feel worse than you already are.
Right. Now, how about the environment? Not just, I'm not talking about global warming here or climate change. I'm talking about how can your environment impact your mental health, whether it's your family environment, whether it's your employment environment, whether it's your social environment, or the biggest one that many people don't realize is your social media environment. Because a lot of us feel like, I'll speak for myself. Well, not even for myself. I mean, what I see, and you tell me if I'm right or not, or if this is a point as well. People are, I think a lot of this, that the mental illness, or even if there's any significant changes happening with mental health, a lot of it I feel like is coming from social media. It's just the comparison that people are having, and see this time and time again, especially with kids now, that it's becoming a little bit more of an epidemic. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how's social media impacting people?
Yeah, I think environment is huge in general. I think most people would agree that the environment plays a huge role in just our overall functioning. I think social environment is especially prevalent. When we talked about how there's an abundance of information, and there's an abundance of applications and different sources of, you can open your phone and you could spend all day on it.
All day, yeah.
Right? And social media does get demonized, and it's opened up a lot of doors for us, but a lot of things are advancements in one space and regression in another, right? So it's unfortunate that that's sometimes the trade-off. I think as far as how this affects our mental illness, there's the consensus is generally that if you have poor mental health or you're struggling mentally, sometimes looking at social media might not be the best thing if you're approaching it from that comparison perspective, right? So we have to understand that, we're not demonizing social media, you and I. We're just trying to explain to people that that environment that you engage in is going to potentially have implications for your mental wellness.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you think about what we see on there, we generally see a highlight reel, generally, right? Because it's selective what you may post or what you decide to put up. We don't see the full picture. We only see one side of a coin, right? And there's been a lot of influencers or different people who've come out with their own challenges with mental illness and things such as that. I think as human beings, we need to be more intentional and deliberate with cultivating an environment that's going to be conducive to us.
Okay.
And most people would agree there that we talk about, when I work with clients, like if I'm working with somebody to help them, one of the first things we do is we take an inventory of their time. Right. So I do a day in their life. We go through, okay, what do you do when you wake up? I work with other professionals too. Like sometimes people are working with counselors and other people. My approach as an occupational therapist is very much on the doing, right? So let's take an inventory of your time. What do you look like? When do you wake up? And we get into it, right? When do you wake up? When do you go to sleep? And we go through the whole use of the person's time. And what I've always found, and there's research to support this, there's a huge correlation between time use and mental health outcomes. So basically, what you'll see is people with poor mental health generally are spending a lot of time in unstructured, non-meaningful activity.
Unstructured.
Okay. So take your day or my day, right? We wake up at a certain time. We have different activities that we engage in for our physical, mental, spiritual, social, various forms of health. If you look at somebody who's depressed, for example, I'm using that just as an example, what I will often see is they're either often sleeping too much, sleeping not enough. There's a lot of unstructured time in their day. There's a lot of time spent potentially scrolling through social media, for example. It's a very easily accessible avenue, right?
Yes.
It's not an always thing. I do see that with younger people, generally more than the older population. But generally, the common theme is there's not a whole lot of structured use of activity. In that same realm, we're talking about an environment, essentially. Right now, if you've got a supportive environment that you've either consciously developed or has been provided to you. So, if you have a supportive social circle, you have other friends. So we talk about like the law of association. So the people that you spend time with, that you're around, they're going to have a huge impact on your overall growth and functioning.
Yep.
Right. So, there's so many examples of this. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with most.
Absolutely.
Right. So we talk about the law. So, you can call it the law of association, for example.
Yeah, just to touch upon that, they say you're the average of the 5 you spend the time with the most, and a lot of people think it's just money. If your 5 friends make 100 grand each, you're going to be making 100 grand. What people don't also realize, over you and I've been chatted about this as well, is if their mentality, is a certain type of way, potentially odds are they're going to influence you, or maybe you're the catalyst. You're influencing people, right? That's something many people don't realize. And just to touch upon entrepreneurship, right? Because that's another specific people that we want to connect with as well. What are your thoughts on how? Entrepreneurs basically go through a gauntlet of emotions. It's a roller coaster, whether in real estate, mortgages, business ownership, or any type of entrepreneurship. There's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, financial setbacks, heartaches, this and that. What is your advice to give to, I guess, anybody that's going through the pitfall right now? Because the last couple of years, people have seen a lot of financial heartaches, pitfalls, rising interest rates, and rising payments for a lot of things. And, we've seen a lot of homelessness as well. So somebody that's kind of seeing that in their business and, they're really kind of down and out, because the stats are 90% of businesses fail in 2 years. And I believe it's 70% in 5 to 7 years. So what would you say to somebody that's, going through some of those challenging moments? What should they lean on? What skills should they try to develop?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So I have a couple of things that I think are important. Number one, we're always going on our personal experience, right? Mm-hmm. As entrepreneurs ourselves. Yeah. Then I think about, okay, well, what do I know about just clinically people in general? So and they're not much different in terms of they're not much difference in terms of their application. Mm-hmm. The only difference is generally entrepreneurs are playing at a very high level, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think entrepreneur, we think self-employed. We think about somebody who's got to be. We think about executive functioning, right? Which is like the term for those higher order processes, right?
It's like an elite athlete.
Basically.
Honestly, that's the way I look at that's how I look at entrepreneurship. You're an athlete, because you're not playing basketball with Michael Jordan, but you're playing with the Jordans of the business world out there, and it's tough, right? So that's sorry to cut you off.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah.
An athlete, right? And if you look at what is an athlete's day
stress levels, Kobe Bryant,
stress levels, and what are athletes? Who are they generally competing with? Other athletes, right? So you're competing with the relative best of the best, and you got to differentiate yourself. So, if you think about it in just like an athlete, if you think about like the 100-meter world record sprinters, the difference between first and last is like milliseconds. Yeah. Right. So we're talking a very small margin of error generally.
Absolutely.
So here's what I think. So personally, my own personal experience has been very much that of, I think the most important trait that we have to cultivate as entrepreneurs in order to be successful is resilience, right? And that can be built through many different ways. Generally, when you think about what's happened in my own case, so as an entrepreneur, I started my entrepreneurial journey formally in end of 2018, beginning of 2019. I started my company around so I became a legitimate incorporated business middle of 2019.
Yeah, just before the pandemic.
Just before the pandemic, right? So I started my company. I took a bunch of personal development courses. I finished a coaching program.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so I was very motivated. I even had a mastermind, a group of like-minded individuals.
I remember that.
We'd meet every month towards goals. And I was also expecting. So I had my daughter was supposed to be born in June of 2020. Mm-hmm. So, everything's going. It's a bit of a very, very unpredictable state of the world. But the beginning of 2020 was supposed to be my year, right? I was getting ready to start, and then COVID happened. So obviously things got affected, right? And then, everything eventually stabilizes given enough time. Yeah. But trying to weather that storm, you need to be resilient. Yeah. It reminds me of, so we've talked, I know that we're most entrepreneurs have some form of, just like an athlete, they have a training regimen, right? An athlete might have a specific diet they follow and a training program. As entrepreneurs, we have our own kind of an approach to managing ourselves to function at a higher level, right? Yes. So we look at a lot of big names in the industry. They have a routine, right? So
Absolutely.
the common theme is it's intentional and deliberate. So it's not by accident. They have a specific way they do things. And what's interesting is what's common is they all have a routine, but it can vary from person to person. So that's another thing that I think is you have to be careful with. Someone's routine might not work for you, just like, Arnold Schwarzenegger's chest workout might not work for me.
That's not going to work.
So
Everybody's body type's different, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in the same way as entrepreneurs, as human beings, we're different. So, if somebody's advocating to get up at 3:30, 4 in the morning, what I should be looking is that the general theme there is that you should have some structure to waking up. And if you get up earlier, you can accomplish more.
Yeah.
Now, practically, that might not be reasonable for somebody like myself who's got 2 kids. But at the end of the day, the takeaway message is I should be deliberate with how I spend my time.
Yes, have a routine.
Yeah, have a routine. And there's kind of like these universal truths. So what I identify strongly with, and I know you do as well, is the ancient wisdom, right? So
Yes.
we've talked about what's really shaped my philosophy in life is Stoicism,
Mhm.
right? So we have got Seneca, Epictetus,
Marcus Aurelius.
right? So
Yes.
the Stoics. And what's interesting is that we're talking ancient wisdom, right? I don't even know how long ago.
Thousands of years ago.
Whatever, AD, BC, we're talking like that type time period.
2,000 years ago plus.
Yes,
yeah.
but what's interesting is that those same rules are just as relevant in today's world, right? And so it reminds me of, so the Stoics talk very much about cultivating a mindset to face adversity, right? I mean, we're talking about a time period where the life expectancy was probably like 35 years,
Yes.
right? So these people were mentally strong. And what they realized was, so you can read any book, you can listen to Seneca, Epictetus, the common theme that they all talk about, Marcus Aurelius, right, is they talk extensively about being able to exercise control over the things in your control, right? So Marcus Aurelius, he says, the quality of your life is in the quality of your thoughts, right?
Absolutely.
Epictetus, he was literally born a slave. So all he could focus on was achieving mastery over your own thoughts. Now that's easier said than done, right? Because everybody accepts that as something that we have to do.
Yeah.
But that's really helped me in terms of focusing on, okay, this is a situation that I'm faced with. What can I do about this?
Absolutely.
Right? And there's tangible things you can do. There's tangible things you can't control. But if we focus on the actions, right? So in an industry like yours, for example, you might not be able to directly control how many deals you're going to get, but you can control how many phone calls I'm going to make, how many people I'm going to follow up with,
Yep.
and you can take the actions that are going to put you in the best position to achieve those goals,
Absolutely.
right? So I think that's hugely important. As far as actual adversity, I have a really great 1-minute story that I think will really bring this. It just came to my head.
Sure. Let's hear it.
It's a. I think it's like it could be from Stoicism, but essentially it's a story about this. It's a story about a farmer and his son. You've heard the story, right?
Yes.
So I'll summarize it really quick, but
No, take your time. Let's hear a story.
Sure.
It's a beautiful story.
it is, right?
Yeah.
It's not a long story anyways.
No.
But essentially there's a farmer and his son. I think it's a Taoist story, right? So there's a farmer and his son. Farming is huge. It's their livelihood, right? And they have a horse. And so that to them is, they literally are surviving because of this animal that's allowing them to plow their field and plow the land so that they can survive. One day their horse runs away, and the neighbors and surrounding villagers come and they express their grief to the family, and they say, we're very sorry to hear about they say something along the lines of, we're very sorry your horse ran away. They express grief towards it, and then the wise farmer, he just says, we'll see. Right? He says, we'll see, or he says, maybe.
Yes.
Essentially, he's just not 100% convinced yet about anything. A couple of days go by, and the horse comes back with a few other horses. So now the neighboring villagers come back a second time, and now they're expressing congratulations. And they're saying to them, look, you guys are rich now. You're going to be so successful. You've got all these horses now. And the farmer says, we'll see. A couple of days go by, and his son now is trying to tame one of these wild horses, and he falls off one of the horses and breaks his leg. Villagers come by again, and they express their grief for the unfortunate incident that happened to their son. Farmer says, as you can guess, he just says, we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. A couple more days go by, and the army comes into the village, and they're there to conscript. So take any able-bodied young men,
Drafting.
to fight in the war.
Yeah.
And because his son has a broken leg, he misses the draft. And as it was around that time, nobody really came back from those wars. So all of those young men were essentially marched off to die. So the moral of the story is that often you can take it and have many different ways, but I believe the moral of the story is essentially sometimes it's too early to tell if something's good or bad.
Right.
Right. So that's why I was saying you can only connect the dots when you look backwards.
Yeah.
And I think that, like any experience, can eventually be, when enough time has passed, you can look back and realize, you know what, some good came out of this.
Yes.
So I think in the grand scheme of things, as to tie it all back, as an entrepreneur who's facing adversity, you just don't know, you don't have enough information. So if you think about it logically, maybe like a researcher or a scientist, you don't have enough data to make an opinion yet.
Absolutely. And you know what? That ties back to resiliency, and you got to be able to weather the storm, because life's going to have its storms. Like Jim Rohn said, there's winters and summers of every there's seasons to this game, and you got to be able to weather the storms. And that's what I've learned over the years as well. You and I have chatted extensively about, ups and downs. And the greatest thing that I find is having a network of people around you. As an entrepreneur, you're going to need, you could have your one-man army, have yourself great. But I prefer my approach of having, Aman's a friend of mine, but also at the same time, we don't realize it, but he's helping me out as well. During, even if not even a challenging time, but just a conversation. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll talk about stoicism and all these beautiful things. So it helps you, reminds you that, like, oh yes, I'm not the only one that's going through this, or I'm not the only one that will go through this. So that's also an amazing thing as well. Now, with people that are in entrepreneurship, let's move on to the next subject here. Let's talk about self-development, right? We talked a little bit about how people have a routine. How important do you think self-development is for an entrepreneurship to continue to develop their skills? How important do you think that is?
I think it's, I think it's highly important. We've talked about, just like an athlete. So, you talked about Kobe Bryant. When he made it to the NBA, he didn't stop working out, right? He didn't stop training. So if it's funny, because a lot of times I think as entrepreneurs, as human beings, before we were entrepreneurs, we're human beings who are focused on self-development, right? We want to improve and get better. And I think that desire sometimes can lead us into entrepreneurship. And then we can, just like the athlete who's made it into the professional sport, we can't forget what built us and took us here. So I think it's funny because sometimes a lot of people might think that they need to do these things in order to be successful. Once you get some modicum of success, you realize it becomes even more important to continue, right? Because now the growth isn't as evident, right? So when it's easy when you're, I think about my first year in business, I think about the money I made in my first year. There's been months where I've made that in 1 month.
Yeah.
And I think about overall in the grand scheme of things, I think about how I'm more focused now on growing and consuming knowledge that's going to help me. The only difference, I think, is you become more aware of what works for you, right? So just like you and I at this stage, we've been there, done that, right? I think anybody, when it comes to personal development at this point, you've come across the big names, right? You've talked about Jim Rohn, Tony Robbins. You can go ancient, right, and talk about the Stoics. You can talk about the art of war, for example. You could talk about even like more religious ideologies like Buddhism and so on, and put those concepts into your life. You can talk about modern day people, right? So we've talked about people like Grant Cardone, Gary Vee, Patrick Bet-David, Eric Thomas, right? All these people. What I find what's helpful, I think, at this stage to keep going, is to deconstruct what's worked for you. So don't reinvent the wheel, right? The people that you identify with maybe now, and the people that helped you at different stages in your journey might no longer apply because maybe you've outgrown that material. So now I'm thinking, I identify with this person's message, and I think this person's message is helping me, and you build that into your life. So I think at this point, the only difference is you know what not to do, and you know what's worked, and like any logical human being, reinforce what's worked and stop things that don't work for you anymore.
Right. So there's levels to this, right? You want to continue applying the new skills to grow and develop, right? Just like you said, there might be somebody that 5 years ago you followed maybe on social media or some books you were reading. You're like, okay, that's great. Now I want to go to the next chapter, right? That being said, the topic we touched upon was mental health and mental illness, but I really want to focus a bit on men's mental health This is a topic that's very important to both of us. I think, especially nowadays, there's some sort of a, for lack of a better term, attack on men's mental health, or men in general. And I see it in society that at times men are kind of outcasted in a way. And I'm not saying given gratitude, or it's just, you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think it's I know exactly what you mean, because it's a tricky time to talk about anything that's a little bit controversial, right?
Talking about men's mental health, I know. Can you believe that? Like, this could be controversial. I'm not saying that there's everybody has mental health problems, or there's subjects to that. I'm just specifically wanted to focus today on just that one piece, and the fact that could be controversial. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's kind of a crazy world.
It is.
That we have to talk about that in that way.
It is. Yeah.
Like, why? Let's go move forward for that.
Yeah. Like, so I think we just have to be careful with we live especially now with the way things are. It's hard not to offend anybody, right? And I think the big thing that we're lacking is intention. So the intention behind the message. Yeah. In our case, we're two men, in this case, talking to each other, hoping to identify some challenges that other men may face.
That's it.
And if somebody can gain from this discussion, great.
Absolutely.
Our intent is that we recognize that, like you said, mental health is on a continuum. Every person, men and women, and everyone else in between, they all experience these challenges. Now, if we're focusing on that, so that's our disclaimer, right? We recognize
exactly
that
right.
every person's experience can be unique. Now,
and we have no issue with that.
No, and there's no issue with that. So as far as men's mental health, we talked a little bit about the statistics, right? So on average, this is universal. This is worldwide. So I can tell you the Canadian statistics. I'm familiar with the UK and America as well. But about 75% of all suicides, so if you think about the worst possible outcome when it comes to mental health, are men.
Yeah.
Right? And if you keep breaking down those numbers further, not only are 75% of suicides men, but if you look at the statistics related to even depression. So right now in Canada, in a given year, there's about 1 million men that are suffering from depression. Yeah. So you have to ask yourself what's different. And it's complicated, right? So we're not going to unpack all of it. But generally speaking, a common issue in mental health or mental illness in general is stigma. This is an issue that men and women both experience.
Stigma how?
So stigma is essentially, if you think about, it can be interpreted different ways, but essentially there's a bit of this fear or shame around having a mental illness or disclosing it, for example. Right. So if you look at if you look at surveys, like if you're my employer and I worked, I might say, hey, Sunny, I'm going to be late today. I got a dentist appointment. Very few people, but you're not going to bat an eyelash. But if I said something like, hey, Sunny, I'm going to be late today. I got to see my psychiatrist. Right now, it's a different, and anybody who, they've done surveys of people and they've talked about majority of people are not as comfortable disclosing a mental health issue compared to maybe some different, like a physical health issue or something like the dentist appointment example. Yes. So stigma is essentially that invisible kind of shame or guilt that's carried around something. And a lot of it is related to feelings of, we think of mental illness as weakness. We can, right? So that's kind of one thing that might prevent people from accessing services. Now, if we look at men in particular, we know that there's a certain kind of stereotype around men being tough and strong and not talking about the problems, right? We see this in our language. We don't have to look far. If you look at our language, we have things like if you think about think about our own childhoods growing up. I knew your dad, you knew my dad, right? Yeah. Very masculine, alpha male type.
We should talk about them a little bit too, how they dealt with their problems.
We could do a whole podcast on them, right? But if you think about like people from that generation, they didn't complain. They generally bottled things up. These are just generalizations, right?
Yes.
It's just examples. So they didn't. That generation was like the generation of the functioning alcoholic.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
They went to work.
100%.
They brought home the check. They didn't talk about their problems, and they coped with substance use or other things.
Absolutely.
Right. So we see a lot of that, and just the whole be a man, men don't cry, take it like a man. This is in our English language.
Yeah.
It's in our Punjabi as well when we talk about these things.
Banda banja, right?
Yeah, banda banja, right? Yeah. So if you think about in our language, we have these things. So. And that's maybe just some examples of why men might not reach out for services. Statistically, we know that men often don't access services if you think about like, because you might say, well, look, we've solved the problem. There's all these resources out there, right? There's people, phone lines, people can call. There's free counseling support. But the issue isn't resources, it's people accessing them. And men, on average, tend to access resources less than women, right? So we see not only greater suicide rates among men, it gets even more interesting because if you look at men versus women statistics, women on average are more likely to attempt suicide, but men are more likely to die by suicide. Men also pick more lethal forms of suicide. These are statistics, right? So things like firearms, weapons, and so on. So these statistics are shocking. And then if we start looking at age, right? So, you know, if you think about everyone's getting older. In Canada, at one point it was number one, but in Canada, the second leading cause of death for men under the age of 50 is suicide.
Under 50 is suicide.
Right? So after age 50, it can be other things like heart disease and so on. It's the second leading cause. I think the first one is like cardiovascular or heart-related issues.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. But in the UK, it's the leading cause of death. So
it's a leading cause of death in the UK.
Men under the age of 50, statistically. So obviously we are recognizing that not only if you think about, we're breaking it down, mental health is an issue. We all identify and agree with that. Then we break it down by men versus women, and we're seeing amongst men, not only are suicide rates higher, lack of services are lower. So there's something going on here that's allowing, or maybe not allowing men to access these services, and then our own experiences, right? So if you forget about as clinicians and just are reflecting on our own background, you know, you're nodding your head, I'm nodding my head, because we agree that we're less likely to talk about some of these issues or problems. And so that may lead us to access services less and really suffer in silence.
Absolutely. I mean, I've connected with a lot of people in the subject off line. And I mean, it's very tragic. I experienced this in one of my family members as well in the past, and it's a heartbreaking thing, right? And it's gut wrenching to get those type of calls, to know that you wish you could do something for that person and not being able to do it. And there's warning signs, but people don't realize that after the fact, when the person's gone, that maybe you could have done something, or what were the warning signs? How could you have helped them? And the fact of the matter is, I think there's a few different characteristics that I've noticed as well. I think purpose. I think as men we need purpose. The truth of the matter is, they say that men are only valued till they can provide, and if they can't provide, they're not valued. I'm not saying for every man. I just want to keep these disclaimers out there, but these are some of the reasons that people say that maybe the reasons why a man might take his life, and it's very scary because a lot of us should be connecting more. I'm not sure if it's the outlet why people don't do it. I've also read some stories online that there's ways to connect men in different group settings that are maybe not focused specifically on a problem. Like there's example that I think it's Australia. They're setting up like workshops for like men to like fix like a lawnmower. So they all come in there to have a common problem, but they kind of chat with each other. So I think, what are your thoughts on being connected?
So you actually got to a really important issue there. So if you look at how mental illness is treated amongst, and this is again, big disclaimer, generalization, right? Generally, if you think about, this is out there, there's other people who have the same view in terms of social media, but a lot of the times we recognize that there can be differences between men and women. There has to be, because why else are we seeing differences in incidence of things like suicide rates? I mean, the number is huge, right? 3,000 out of 4,000 people every year who commit suicide are men. Wow. So I think you got to heart of an issue. I personally, my personal view, non-clinical, just my personal view, is that lack of purpose can be a big part of it. It can affect both men and women in that same way. But I think a difference is, if you look at how mental health for men and women might be treated, it's generally the same approach, right? So a lot of the therapy is focused on, at some stage, around making somebody feel loved and accepted, which is important. But a lot of men want to feel more competent, powerful, and in control in a positive way, right? I'm speaking for myself here. I have a strong source of identity. I think entrepreneurs, no male entrepreneur or even female entrepreneur might have any challenges with this statement. We understand that there's a big focus or strength in having some degree of autonomy, right? So we talked about the Stoics. They're very much about internal validation, Seeking external validation is more of a foolish surrender of your own autonomy. That's the language they use, right? So very strong language around how important it is for that. And I think in my case, I see this, every single person that I see generally is having trouble with, so if you think about occupational therapy, right? When you think about occupation, most people think work.
Right.
And a large aspect of that is people who are affected from an injury or something and they're not able to work. So when you say, hey, I'm a mortgage specialist, for example, and I say I'm an occupational therapist, my identity is largely formed on what I'm doing. I don't say, hey, Sunny, I work as an occupational. I say I am an occupational therapist. You can say I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse. That's how we even
self-identify.
Yeah, if we're at a networking event, party, whatever, you might say, what do you do? People generally respond with, I am a this.
I am a, yes.
Right? So you can look, our identity is largely formed by our ability to contribute and provide. Now you take away that ability to contribute, and this is how I literally see mental illness in most of my clinical practice. You take away that ability, and if that ability is taken away for long enough, it's a matter of time before that person's going to have a mental illness. It could be depression from not being able to provide and contribute. It can be anxiety from when now they're better now, and now they're trying to get back to work and trying to get back to those things, and they're having issues with confidence. So now you're seeing lack of confidence in their abilities. And so all of that is centered around this human need to contribute and be valued, essentially.
Right.
And a lot of people who have these issues, they generally may have that lack of feeling of providing. And I believe that men generally have a stronger need for that, and women may get it from other areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, not always.
Not
right?
always, but
generally, if we're just, and this is, again, my opinion.
Yes, that's right. Now, let's talk a little bit about that, because you're saying, we were also talking about how, the general need to provide. And what's the retirement age in Canada? 65?
Well, it was 65, but with cost of living, it seems to be...
It's going up higher now.
Up, yeah.
It's longer
but it's still 65, you can retire.
So the retirement age is 65, and when people retire, usually at 65, what typically happens is, I've heard of a lot of, whether wealthy people or anybody that worked a job for an extensive period of time, after 65, if they stop working, their health went down, deteriorated, and many of them pass away. Now, this can be directly potentially correlated to purpose. Is that not true?
Yeah, 100% purpose. Our purpose is maybe what we do externally, but our purpose gives us value, right? So if you think about retirement, that's a good example, because I can tell you my own personal and clinical experience. I've known people who are older and working, and anytime I ask them, you say, what's your secret, right? I met 78-year-olds who are working, and they say, they'll say, I don't stop.
Keep busy, right?
Keep busy. In English we say, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yes.
And I think that it's a universally accepted concept. I would say it's a law of nature, right? It's a universal truth. And you know how we can see? You and I both have children, right?
Yes.
You have a 2-year-old?
2.5-year-old?
Yeah. I got a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old.
Yeah.
What do they do when they're around us? So maybe not the older ones, like my 3-year-old, she's talking, she's doing other things. But when I look at even a 1.5-year-old, his way of communication, he picks things up and brings them to you, right? And even the older ones, they want to always engage with you through some form of contribution.
What do we do for our parents, for our moms?
Yeah.
Like, have you noticed a change in terms of energy as well?
Yes. Yeah. Like in terms of with my mom, I noticed it keeps her
active
young. Keeps her active.
Yeah.
And same thing, purpose, right? So now, in my case, it's my wife, my 2 children, and my mom, and we live together. And so when with my mom, and my mom also has a health condition, and I've noticed her aging backwards since 2020 when we had kids, because now she's got a value. She's always got. See, the interesting thing is that human beings are valued. So if you have a friend or a loved one, like whether my mom could provide or not at her stage in life now, she's still valued by me. But the issue is that person has to feel internally valued. They have to feel that I'm providing whatever that contribution looks like to them. Right. Now she's got a very tangible way to be like, look, when she does things like today, when I'm going to work, my wife's at work, my mom and my mother-in-law are together watching our children.
Oh, wow.
Right. So we see it from a young age where they'll bring things to you. Kids will bring things to you. If you ever try to, even the older ones, if you try to get them to do things, generally, if they do something and they feel valued and you compliment them, I swear they get like 6 inches taller, right? They get like bigger and taller and excited and happy, and you reinforce you reinforce the hell out of that when they do those things, and they're very happy to do that. So I think it's a basic human need to want to contribute, and through contribution, we provide value. And if you look at some of our personal development people, right? So in psychology, we have something called Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right, so he talks essentially upside down pyramid, and it goes from your basic needs to your higher level needs. Tony Robbins, he talks about right, and the highest level of need is always contribution. Absolutely. Right, so if you think about, okay, my basic needs are met. I got food, water, shelter. Maybe you have somebody or something to love, and as you go forward, the last one, regardless of if it's Tony Robbins or Abraham Maslow, who's like from like the 1930s or something, or even if you go back to the Stoic concepts. Right, or the Japanese have a concept called ikigai. Ikigai, right. So again, if you look at that, there's universal truth and there's universal laws. Yep. And one of them is always that need to contribute, and through contribution we gain purpose, and through purpose, seva. Look at that. Even in our culture, religion, in our culture we have seva, which is it's one of the core tenets of Sikhism. Yeah. When you think about seva, so.
That reminds me of a couple of different questions I really want to ask you as well. The first one is, as an entrepreneur in his or her 20s, and they're thinking about getting married and taking the next step and having children. Many people, or some people think, oh, well, it's going to put my career to the side, or it's going to slow my progress down. What is your advice on somebody that's saying, you know what, I'm going to wait, I'm going to build more success and then have kids? Would you say, have them while you're young right now, while you can, and you still can operate your business, or get your business to a certain level and then do it? I know it's a very broad question, but what's your experience been like? Yeah, has it impacted your growth in your business?
Hugely. So I think...
How so?
Yeah, so I think you nailed it, first of all, with it's going to depend on the person, right? So what might matter, what might be important to one person versus another. I can tell you my personal experience has been, like I said, I started my business formally in 2019. 2020 had my first kid. 2023 last year had my second one. I can say that naturally there's going to be a shifting of energy towards that as well. So I think blanket answer, there's, like we talked about, we're going to give useful, helpful advice. There's no one size fits all approach.
That's right.
So we agree with that, right? Yeah. So whenever it's the right time for you, now that's what I think is my blanket answer. Now, as far as my own personal experience, I think being a father, being a parent has been a hugely enriching life experience for me, and a huge ongoing source of personal development. I was joking with my wife, you know myself very well, and I'm very much focused like you are on personal development, looking at, wisdom from different sources.
Absolutely.
And I was joking with my wife how I never thought two of my greatest spiritual leaders in life would be my 1.5 and my 3-year-old.
That's right.
Because I learned so much from them every day.
Yeah.
Right? Learn how to slow down, learn how to appreciate the little moments when I'm trying to rush and be like, okay, we're trying to get here. We have this deadline to meet. They don't care. They have no concept of time. No. So if we can keep that inner child alive, I think it's helpful. So I think personally, as far as it is, I don't think you should put any area of your life on hold for something you can't control in the future. So I have good friends who are in great relationships, and they have been for a while, and they've put off getting married because they're like, I'm going to get married once I get into this program or I get this job. Right. Okay. I personally, knowing what I know now, I remember I got engaged after I finished my master's degree, and then I got married. I got engaged at the beginning of it, so in 2016, and I got married in 2018. If I were to go back, I would have just gotten married in 2016, knowing what I know now. Because you never want to live your life on a contingency of, I'm going to do this when this happens, if you can't 100% control when the thing you're talking about is going to happen.
Absolutely.
Right? So if I can't control that I'm going to do this by this date, don't live your life like that. Yeah. I think if the time is right, there's no perfect time. Look at our parents. I mean, maybe there's some obviously pros and cons with their experience. Right. But we talked about the other day about how, our parents' level of development, because a lot of times a lot of our generation can attack their parents a little bit. Yeah. But we talked about how what our parents' ceiling should be our basement, right? And we're going to grow from that. So our parents didn't have it figured out. I think you should have some degree of stability, whatever that looks like for you. But if you're waiting for don't live your life on a contingency of when this or that might happen. That's just amazing. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, before we get wrapped up here, you hit a couple of things right there that I really want to talk about. But I guess we'll talk a little bit about let's talk about your personal stuff now, about your personal achievements. You know, when you hit a personal achievement or a goal, what do you do as an entrepreneur to kind of celebrate? Because I think it's very important as entrepreneurs to have some sort of goal and celebrate that win rather than just keep trucking along. It's got to be a purpose to it. So what's something that you've done? I know you've gone on vacations, bought some nice things.
Yes.
Let's share what that is.
Yeah, so I think you nailed it. As an entrepreneur, as a human being, we have to celebrate our wins.
Yeah.
Right? So we talk about, every human being talk about goals and things like that. I think it's important to celebrate those victories, celebrate those wins.
How do you do it?
So here's how I do it. I think my personal opinion is that the magnitude of the goal and the magnitude of the celebration should be in line.
Okay.
Right? So for example, if you think about sometimes people might, so for bigger deals. So like, for example, one of my goals end of 2022 December.
Yeah.
I bought one of my dream cars.
Yeah.
Right. So so for me,
a Dodge Viper. So just in case anybody's wondering what it is, dream car. It's a Dodge Viper.
Yes.
Everybody's dream car.
Exactly. So
right. Okay.
for me, that was a big deal because I had the money to buy it sooner.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. But in my head, I was like, you know what? It's not the time, because I had other things in my life at the point.
That's right.
So for me, that was a bigger celebration. I was like, okay, I'm 3 years into business. I've successfully been able to have a baby and provide and do all those things with my wife.
Yeah.
And so it made the sense for me at the time. So I think you need to have big celebrations, and it can be things like cars, whatever it's important to you. I think that sometimes we can focus on, people might attack or look down on things that might seem like a monetary superficial thing, but it's not that. It's the significance behind it that it holds for you. Right. So for me, that was like a big check off my list, because for me, it was a celebration of success in business and life, but also being able to delay gratification.
Right.
Because in my head, I was like, I knew I could do it sooner, but I was like, I can't do this and be able to do all the things I want to do with my family.
Absolutely.
So that was one thing. Vacations, I think, are important, not only for celebration, but we talked about what works for you as an entrepreneur. You need to have a strategy for what renews your energy. And for me, periodically, it's those things. The other thing, as a parent now, family man, what's really important to me is the value or happiness I derive from being able to give other people important, close to me, experiences. Right?
Beautiful.
We're both car guys. It's not, that hunk of metal in my garage doesn't matter as much as the experience that I get enjoying it with my people that matter to me.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think people forget the intention behind it.
Yeah.
So that's how I celebrate. I think I try to have, like, if I set a big goal and I accomplish it, then I have a big celebration.
Awesome.
But you also have to have little things along the way to keep your tank running,
100%.
so you can get to those bigger ones, right?
Totally. And that's this is coming up to the end of the podcast here. But before we go, just one quick question. What does master your life mean to you?
Yeah, quick question, but it's a big one, right? So
it's a big one. Quick or big? Just
yeah. I mean, honestly,
what do you think? What does that mean to you?
So it's everything we've talked about. Mm-hmm. For me, I think master your life, it just goes back to being able to respond to adversity, because that's inevitable, right? In life, it's going to come up, whether it's in business, whether it's in life. Sometimes it's predictable. A lot of times it isn't.
Yeah.
So I think for me, mastery is being able to conquer myself.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's being able to accomplish my goals, deal with adversity. And it's not so much about responding to it, but I think about how I respond to it, right? So if you think about a lot of my philosophy in life is being able to stay calm, cool, and collected while dealing with all those things, right? So to be successful, to master life, I think you have to be able to operate in chaos.
Yeah.
And with 2 little kids, I have to do that on a daily basis.
That's awesome.
But that's what mastery is. It's a little bit of that external stuff, but also the internal, progressing towards growing, whatever that looks like for you.
Amazing. How can our listeners or viewers get connected with you?
Yeah, I think Instagram's always
Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram's. I think Instagram's always great, right?
What's your Instagram handle again?
So it's just it's AMAN, AMAN dot RANGI, RANGI.
Yeah.
Really simple.
Email for your business, or you can reach out to him on his Instagram page as well. So make sure you guys connect with them. Is there any other form of contact that you would recommend for clients, or Instagram is fine for now?
I think Instagram's great.
Okay.
Send me a DM if you have questions or anything like that, and I would love to connect.
And he also helps people out with their cars as well. He helped out so many people in our network.
Cars is a big thing for us.
Reach out for cars. And once again, Aman, thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciate this time. Look forward to doing another one with you again.
Thanks, Sunny.
Thanks.